Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Krashy, and today I wanted to do a very kind of like open mic podcasty kind of style video where I just like blow through all the held items, give my thoughts on the held items, why I think some are good, what I think they could do, and ultimately share an idea that will be at the end of the video that I really think could balance out held items quite a bit. So definitely stay tuned toward the end. You don't want to miss that part. But let's go ahead and dive in. This is actually my second time recording it because the first one was way too long. So I want to kind of just share my thoughts on items, and yeah, we'll talk about the items and the current state of the held item meta. So first and foremost, I think that the number one thing that definitely has to be considered right now is that when you're looking at the held items, you should almost entirely pretend like there is no flat stats on these items at all, because the flat stats that you get compared to the scaling stats that you get just being a Pokemon in the game leveling up is very, very small. So a lot of these numbers, they don't really mean a ton, and you're more so picking the item for the item's effect more so than the stats. And that is something that we all had to kind of learn over time as we kind of started to get more information about the game, you know, post-release, and that's why some items that looked really, really good ended up being pretty bad. So let's go ahead and jump in. So Aeos Cookie, attack weight, and special attack specs. My problem with these items is that scoring 6 times is hard, especially in higher tier games. Nobody's really just going to let you score 6 times. You would have to pair these items up maybe with like a score shield, or have to play specifically to score them. And while that's not impossible, the issue that you'll run into with that kind of a strategy or with doing that is that, you know, we're limited to 3 item slots, and with the current item meta, there are other items that are so high value that you don't really want to give them up. So when you start thinking about where can you throw in an attack weight, an Aeos Cookie, or a special attack specs, it ends up leaving you in a position where you have to get rid of something really, really strong. Now, that could be more of an issue with the other items that are overtuned, probably more so is, and I think that these scaling scoring items will probably eventually have a place in the meta, or they're like sleeper items, because I don't think that they're terrible. It's just really hard to score 6 times in a game, so that's just kind of what I'm thinking. For these items, I think it'd be really cool if they could maybe cut the max stacks on the capping to like 3, because that's a little bit more tangible, and then maybe find a way to keep the same value, but like, I don't know, scale up each score. Like, it would be every single score would be a much bigger power spike. So like attack weight is plus 18 flat stacks on 30, and then each score is plus 12 attack. Well, like, what if they just did it for 3 scores and it was plus 24 attack? That'd be a huge power spike in the early game, but that could kind of be the strength of the item potentially, or maybe they'd have to cut that down. I don't know, but scoring 6 times is really, really hard. I'm going to go ahead and pair Assault Vest and Rocky Helm together here. You know, we have some flat defense, some flat SP defense, some flat HP. Again, don't really care about those. But these items are actually not terrible. I mean, I think kind of Rocky Helm is, so we'll talk about that here in a second. But, you know, gaining a SP shield when you're out of combat for 8 seconds, 15% of HP, I think this item's pretty good for Assault Vest. I think the issue with these, like, out of combat items is that the time that it takes for it to get out of combat, 8 seconds, is really, really long. I'm not gonna lie, I'd like to see these items drop down to like 3 or 4 seconds out of combat, and really see some of these items see like an increase in viability, just because you're starting to get that effect faster. Again, we pick items for the effect more so than anything else, and I think that that could be really interesting. As for Rocky Helm, I don't know, it just doesn't really feel like the effect is good enough. Like, you have to absorb enough damage and then it deals some damage back, but I don't think that the damage that it deals back is like good enough. And then you have to also factor in the fact that you only have 3 item slots, and that's a big issue with some of these items, is that, you know, when you're looking at an item and whether or not it's good, you have to compare it versus something else you could fit in that slot. So I think the game would be really interesting. I'm not saying that this is what should happen, but the game would be really interesting if we had like 5 item slots, because then we'd really have a lot of room to move around and make like more comprehensive or subjective builds. But Rocky Helmet just kind of falls to the wayside in terms of its item effect, because I just don't think it's that great. It could definitely use like a percentage buff. Maybe it could deal more damage back out. Would be a little bit cooler. So I don't know. That could definitely be an option. Alright, let's talk about Buddy Barrier. Buddy Barrier is problematic. I think that this is one of the only items that I really think that they should nerf. 40% HP shield, I think that just needs to come down. I think honestly any between like 15 to 25% would be much more appropriate, and even then it would still be strong. So I don't know, that's my only thought on nerfing items. I don't really want to see items nerfed too much, but I do think that Buddy Barrier could probably get nerfed, or they would really have to buff up a lot of the other items. Energy Amplifier. Again, I'm not really touching on the flat stats much because they're just so negligible, but Energy Amplifier is a pretty good item. It's just really niche, and that's fine. Like a 21% damage increase for 4 seconds after using your ult, that pairs really, really well with some Pokemon, and it's really, really useless for others. And I have no problem with that. I think Energy Amplifier is probably one of the more balanced items in the entire game. But again, the sentiment has to remain that flat stats on these items are just so low that you don't really like care to pay attention to them, or you know, that's not really what affects whether or not an item is good. Exp Share, again, another super niche item because you're really only going to probably run this on like tanks or supports in general. But I think it's pretty effective. I think it's pretty solid. Yeah, I don't know. I like this item. I think it's another one of those items. It's niche, but it's pretty balanced in my opinion. I don't think it feels weak, to me at least, and I don't think it feels overly necessary. Like, you can run a support without running this, but it just feels good to run it in my opinion, so for sure. Alright, Floatstone and Shell Bell. I'm going to kind of pair these off together. The flat stats are not anything to you know, write home about for sure. And then the increased, like the increased movement speed, the effect of the item is what you're taking the item for, but it's just not that good. You get a 20% increased movement speed, but you have to wait 8 seconds for getting out of combat. And just the fact is, like, these out of combat items, like at some point, like, we almost get into a stage of the game where like those moments where you're out of combat are like fleeting. So they kind of just lose their value the longer the game goes on and every game goes to the end. So I don't know. I think that the best way to balance these like out of combat items is to drop that time down. Like, if it was 3 seconds instead of 8, could you imagine? Like, you literally step away from a fight and then boom, you're running 20% faster. You know, for leftovers, you step away from a fight, boom, you're healing super fast, like 3 seconds later. Really, really cool. As for Shell Bell, same thing. The flat stats are nothing, and I just don't think that the heal that this item brings you like scales enough to warrant taking it over another item. So they could either improve the healing on an item like this, like up the efficacy of the item effect in order to make it comparable to something else. Again, Shell Bell is one of those items that falls to the wayside because you just have limited options, and there are really, really strong options like Buddy Barrier, Focus Band, Muscle Band, etc. Speaking of Focus Band, again, flat stats, whatever, but 14% of your lost HP gets recovered over 3 seconds on a 90-second cooldown. This is your oh crap button. Like, you know, when you're about to die, this item just can literally save you. A lot of the time you probably don't even notice it, but when you're wearing this item and it's off cooldown, this is a very, very good item to have. I don't think that this item needs to get nerfed. I think other items need to kind of catch up to this kind of an effect. Maybe. So that's kind of Focus Band ruling the meta with Buddy Barrier for sure. Really strong. As for leftovers, I kind of talked about it. I think that like dropping that time out of combat would make these items much, much more valuable. I still think they kind of fall off though, because you know, you get to the end of the game and you're not going to get that effect unless you're kind of dipping and diving in and out of combat, which, you know, you could maybe get some value out of, but the flat stats on this thing are nothing, essentially, and, you know, having to wait 8 seconds to get out of combat, not good. Muscle Band, flat stats, meh, whatever, but 3% of the remaining target's HP per hit, that is health shred. I mean, this is a percentage-based item effect that gives you additional damage. It's really, really strong. I think that this item is really strong because it's one of the few items that are really strong, but I don't actually know if I think this one's OP. I think that other items should catch up to this item's effect, and that's kind of the sentiment. Like, for items, I don't want them to nerf items per se, except for maybe Buddy Barrier, but I want them to buff the item effect or the efficacy of the items, and like I said, I have an idea for that. We talked on Rocky Helm. Scope Lens, another pretty balanced item. It scales really, really well through the game with that 75% of attack stat, so the more that you level up, you know, the higher your crit chances, because you know, you have this item, the higher the crit hit damage is higher, and then as you level up, you gain more attack stats, which ties into the damage that you can deal out. So Scope Lens, it's a little bit more niche, just a tiny bit more niche than, say, like Muscle Band, but it's really, really strong, so pretty solid option. And then Score Shield, same. I actually think this item is super obnoxious, but I don't know if I think it's OP. And maybe they could drop down the 10% HP shield to like 8% or something, but I think that it's kind of fine. Like it's just really obnoxious, but it does its job, and it makes you have to put attention on it. And again, it definitely kind of, I don't want to say it suffers, but it's in one of those situations where we do only have 3 slots, so you're giving up something when you run it for sure. So we talked about Shell Bell, special attack specs, and then Wise Glasses, another really solid option. It's the thing about Wise Glasses is it's a little bit less applicable than Muscle Band on a lot of characters because, you know, this requires SP attack scaling to be good. So like someone like Ninetales or like Venusaur, honestly, like while those characters are like SP attack scaling, I don't actually think that this item is super great for them. I think that they actually get more effective use out of Muscle Band. So maybe SP attack or like Wise Glasses could see a slight boost in the percentage SP attack increase, but I think that it's a pretty good item. It's like on the higher end of most items because it has a scaling SP like percentage for it. So as you level up and your SP attack increases, this will also bring you more stats because it is percentage based. So pretty solid. So let's go ahead and, because I see this video is going a little bit long, let's go ahead and talk about my item. For the items that have weaker effects, I think what you want to do, like I think what they should do, is buff the item effects in some way. Like I said, with the scaling scoring items, like drop that down to 3 scores at the cap and increase the like the amount of stats that you get per score, so the power spikes are really big and that you could actually stack those items up really fast and then have like a solid item throughout the game. For the items that require you to be out of combat, drop those effects down in time, you know what I mean, like 8 seconds down to like 4 or 3 seconds. But this is the other item I had, or the other idea I had rather. For some of these items that don't have these really strong effects, you can buff them up a little bit, like buff up the item effects, or they have the option to, or they could add this thing to make the flat stats scale. So let's look at an item. Let's look at Floatstone. At 30, it has plus 24 attack and plus 120 speed. What if they added like a percentage increase or a flat increase per level? So it's like plus 24 attack, and then it's like, I don't know, plus 5 attack per level. So then it's like it has a flat stat value, but it also has like a flat scaling effect on it as well. Or they could even take it further if they wanted the numbers to be a little bit bigger. You'd have to play with the balance of it, obviously, but it could be attack plus 24, and then it could have like a plus 1% attack per level or plus 2% attack per level. So then you're really starting to add in again, and it just kind of starts to stack up. So that would be a little bit like the effect of Wise Glasses, but it would be on the actual stat line. So that way the items that don't have the most effective scaling like item effects to them would have a little bit of a scaling effect to the stat line. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I really just wanted to spitball about the items and why I think the meta of the items the way that it is. Really, we just have some items that are like really big standouts, and I think it's because some of the other items are weaker. Some of the items feel weak because we only have 3 slots and it's hard to give up other options. But in terms of buffs and nerfs, I'd love to see some of these items get like new effects, like I said, like added percentage increase, added scaling per level, or just buff the item effects in general. As for Buddy Barrier, I do think that Buddy Barrier is like the only item on this list that needs to get nerfed. It's got to come down a little bit, at least down from like 40% to 25 or 30% minimum. It's got to come down to that. But yeah, that's just kind of what I'm thinking. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you think about the held items and what would be a good solution, because I'm not gonna lie, I kind of think that like buffing the effects is definitely the best way to start. That's where they should always start. But then maybe touching the flat stats and giving those flat stats a little bit of scaling too could be interesting. So as always, friends, thank you so much for watching, spending your time with me here on the channel. Be sure to be kind to one another, tell someone that you love them, and I'll see you on the next video.